Good morning. Sorry. I'm in the middle of like 20 different things. The cable guy should be here soon. I'd say in the next well, they said they'd be here between 11 and 2. So it's a pretty broad open window. But I've been home since 8 a.m. and I've been doing stuff, cleaning up. Now I'm walking. Hey, Carol. So we're going to start here in a minute. I just didn't want to I didn't want to be late for another stream for you guys. I didn't want to delay it. So you guys are just going to hear me mop real quick. I've been cleaning up after sick dogs since I've gotten home. So, and I want to put my coffee on. I hope everyone's doing good and had a good weekend. I had a good weekend, I guess. I had Friday and Saturday off, and as I said Sunday morning, I got to hang out with my friends, so that was awesome, because I don't usually do that. Because she lives 2 hours away from me. She lives in the town that I used to live in. That's where I met her when I was living out there. And I had to move back to Payson. So, but, all right. Strong coffee. I'll let that go, and then I'm going to go mop real quick. This is how sometimes I feel like I'm a mom. I don't want to be offensive to anybody who actually has children, because clearly I don't. But having to constantly clean up after sick dogs who eat something that they shouldn't or get into things. And then I have to constantly clean up after them. And hopefully that's it with the puking. And that she got whatever it was up. All right. And then we'll start reading this book. And then I guess I'll just read it until I read a couple of chapters and we discuss it, or I'll read it until if the cable guy comes. Like if he's supposed to be here at 11, from 11 to 2, and he shows up right at 11, then I'll go to have to end it. So that's the coffee. I love my Keurig machine, by the way. I got this for Hanukkah. Absolutely love it. Let's see, creamer. All right. Hey, Leanne. Welcome. Ooh, sorry. I hope also everyone had a good time. I know it's kind of weird to say it, but like, had a good time streaming Making a Murderer this weekend. I saw that it made trending now, which is awesome. That's awesome, guys. So, I guess if you guys want to still continue to do that on, keep streaming it, it's up to you. I don't mind doing it either. I just, be real honest with you guys. Is it going the right way? Or is it the wrong way? Is it? Hold on. I'll be real honest with you guys. I very rarely watch TV when I'm home, but I'll try to make an effort to stream it. All right. So it was actually it was quite amazing that I could stream it when I was home. I guess I could stream it at work too. All right, so we're reading from Anatomy of a False Confession by Michael Cincinnati, and I left off on page 139, chapter 26. Oops, don't let that fall. That makes a loud noise. Called Reversal of Fortune. So let me go here real quick. You can hear the dog must be feeling better because she's chasing the cat around behind me. Must be feeling better. All right. All right, so we'll start from here. A pretrial motion is, in many ways, like an appeal. Both are written requests, based on the facts in the law, for the court to do something. The main difference is that while an appeal is directed to an appellate court, a pretrial motion is directed to a trial judge. As a trial lawyer, I have filed numerous, probably several hundred, pretrial motions. Hold on 1 second. The dog is trying to jump on the bed. I have to move the stairs because if the stairs goes under the bed, then the dog can't get on the bed. Now she is on the bed. Hopefully she doesn't puke on the bed. Right? You're not going to puke anymore, are you? No, you're good. Okay. These have included motions to dismiss cases, to exclude irrelevant evidence, and to suppress illegal obtained evidence, including coerced confessions. Prosecutors don't like defense motions. As one prosecutor angrily told me in a candid moment before a court hearing, your motions are like oils on my ass. But while a defense motion may force a prosecutor to read and, once in a great while, file a written response, that's usually the extent of the damage. Trial judges don't often grant defendants pretrial motions, particularly those that seek to suppress evidence. In some cases, trial judges will deny such motions without any thought at all. Their lack of analysis can make the 2-paragraph discussion in Dassey's appellate court discussion look like a full-length novel by comparison. However, depending on the trial judge and the nature of the motion, defense lawyers do sometimes win. And the reaction to these victories can include relief, joy, and other positive emotions. But most of all, winning restores a feeling of professionalism to the practice of law. The judge didn't just do whatever he or she wanted. Instead, the judge actually read the motion, thought about the facts, understood the legal principles, and then applied the law, even when doing so hurts the government's case. That's what we're hoping will happen with Judge Sukovich. I'm trying really hard not to say suck at this. Hi, T-Rex. Welcome. Trying really hard not to say that word. But, yeah, that's what we're hoping will happen with Stevens, that the judge will actually look at the motion that Zellner has been filing and will actually grant a retrial, or at least a hearing of evidence that she wants, to then lead into a retrial. Hey, Roxana, welcome. That's our biggest hope so far, so. These positive emotions must have been what Dassey's lawyers experienced when his appeal moved from the conviction-affirming, rubber-stamping state appellate court system to the federal court system. The District Court of the Eastern District of Wisconsin did what the state appellate court should have done nearly 4 years earlier, and that Dassey's trial judge should have done about 1 decade earlier, suppress Dassey's confession. To begin his analysis, United States Magistrate Judge E. Duffin answered the obvious question: was Dassey's confession true? The court acknowledges significant doubts as to the reliability of Dassey's confession. Critical details involving through repeated leaning and suggestive questioning in general stopped changing only after the investigators, in some manner, indicate to Dassey that he finally gave the answers they were looking for. Purportedly cooperative details could have been the product of contamination from other sources, including the investigators' own statements and questioning, or simple logic guesses rather than the actual knowledge of the crime. But oddly, while the truth of confession can be the bias of allowing the state to use it at a defendant's trial, the falsity of the confession cannot be the basis for suppressing it or keeping it out of trial. Instead, if a person voluntarily but falsely confesses, it is the jury, not the court, that serves as a check against the innocent person being convicted of a crime he did not commit. Obviously, Dassey's jury did not protect him from conviction. Ken Kratz and his fellow government agents had executed a well-organized, highly effective media campaign before trial. In doing so, they won over the general public long before the jury set foot in the courtroom. Additionally, Dassey never had the benefit of a false confession expert at trial. This allowed the prosecutor to convincingly, but falsely, argue that the people who are innocent don't confess. So even if Dassey's fate wasn't sealed before his trial began, it certainly was sealed by the time the jury started its deliberations. Which somebody asked me last time we were talking about this, if people like the guy who's being charged for the Ohio 4 murders, is he receiving a fair trial? And my honest answer is that I don't think he would, because unfortunately, it's a very high publicized trial. Everybody's talking about it, especially on YouTube and the mainstream media. Everybody is digging into it, which, you know, is a double-edged sword. If you have so many eyes on something, does it help it? Like, let's say with Stephen and Brendan's case. Having so many people research into it and dig into it, does that help Brendan and Stephen? Absolutely. But if you have an instance like this Brian dude, I think that's his name, right, Brian? You know, in his issues, if you have everybody who already formed an opinion that he's the murderer and he did it and this is how he did it and this is all the evidence that we think that they have and blah, 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 and then you got all these different on YouTube, on Twitter, on cable TV, blah, blah, blah. Then by the time he gets to trial, is there going to be any jury who's going to honestly sit there and say, I have no idea what the details of this case, so I'll be listening to it unbiasedly. It's just like with Brendan. Did Brendan have that? No. So that's my main worry with certain cases that hit mainstream media. And I'm all about true crime, don't get me wrong. I love listening to like That Chapter, and I love listening to Foul Play, but the difference is in those things is those are closed cases. Stephen and Brendan's is technically a closed case, right? So, hopefully it opens up and then they, do the right thing for Stephen and Brendan. But a lot of the true crime I listen to is closed case, which means even if I gave an opinion on this platform saying, well, this person that murdered something 20 years ago and already went to jail and all that, and here's their story, and here's how they did it, and here's all the evidence, and blah, 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 it's not really going to affect the outcome of their trial. So I think there should be, and that's where I have my personal opinion of if somebody has been arrested for a crime, and I think that the news people should have some sort of standard, or the police or whatever, where they don't disclose anything until after the trial. But that, that's my opinion. And I'm also very anti, government control. So, I don't even want there to be a law, because then the government will mess that up. But anyway, it's just a complex thing. All right, back to reading. Given that the truth of the confession was an issue for the jury, the federal judge had decided whether Dassey's confession was voluntary. If a confession is the product of deception interrogation tactics that have overcome the defendant's free will, the confession is involuntary. And if it's involuntary, then Dassey is entitled to a new trial where the state will not be allowed to use the confession. Can you imagine if that actually... Can you imagine if that actually went through? If they did not allow, or if they took off the confession from Brendan, they have nothing on the guy. They have nothing on the guy other than that confession. That would have been groundbreaking if that actually succeeded in that. When determining whether the confession was voluntary or involuntary, the judge must look at the totality of the surrounding circumstances, both the characteristics of the accused and the details of the interrogation. Instead of cherry-picking one or two facts to reach a predetermined outcome, the federal judge actually evaluated all of the surrounding circumstances. He acknowledged that interrogators seated Dassey on a piece of upholstered furniture and offered him food and beverages. And he acknowledged that some of the other facts recited by the state appellate court, while not important, were also true. For example, the judge agreed that Weger and Fassbender maintained calm tones when interrogating Dassey. However, when assessed against all the circumstances of Dassey's interrogation, these facts were overshadowed by far more consequential facts. What are these far more consequential facts with regarding to Dassey's personal characteristics? They included Dassey's young age, his limited intellectual abilities, even for his age, which I believe they said it was he was 16 or 17. I think they said he was intellectually at the age of a 10-year-old or something like that, or maybe a 13-year-old. And his complete lack of experience with the police. The judge also considered that Dassey did not have an adult with him during the interrogations. After all, it is easier to overbear the will of a juvenile than a parent or attorney. And with regard to interrogators' tactics, the judge recognized that Weger and Fassbender exploited Dassey. For example, the judge noticed that the interrogators repeatedly told him they were looking out for him, and even regularly touched him and talked about their role as friends and fathers, not as cops. However, the real kicker for the judge was the interrogators' repeated false promises. Sure, they employed the simple trick described in Chapter 12. They first told Dassey they can't make any promises, right before unleashing their torment of promises. But the judge wasn't looking for a form over substance trick so he could rubber stamp the conviction. Rather, he looked at the substance of dozens of promises Wiegert and Fassbender made to Dassey. Subsequently, the judge was not swayed by their no-promise disclaimer. He realized that this single isolated statement was drowned out by the host of assurances that they already knew what happened and that Dassey had nothing to worry about. In his judge's court, it is substance over form that matters, and a promise that wears another label is still a promise. The judge's analysis of the case law was equally thorough, and even more frustrating for the prosecutors. He wasn't buying the government's canned, simplistic arguments that the state appellate court hungrily devoured. For example, Dassey's prosecutors had employed this tired trope. To begin, they cited the cases where the defendants had been interrogated longer than Dassey had been. Next, they pointed out that in those cases, the courts did not suppress the confessions. Therefore, they concluded this judge should not suppress Dassey's confession. For a defense lawyer, battling this type of argument is like debating a kindergartner on foreign policy in the Middle East. It is incredibly difficult and probably impossible to bring your opponent up to the level necessary to even meaningful discussion. As Dassey's appellant lawyers put it, to argue that false promises made to Brendan must be acceptable because other defendants were determined longer is to compare apples to oranges. And in the end, the judge agreed. Wiegert and Fassbender repeatedly claimed to already know what happened and assured Dassey that he had nothing to worry about. These repeated false promises, when considering in conjunction with all the relevant factors, most especially Dassey's age, intellectual deficits, and absence of supportive adult, rendered Dassey's confession involuntary. In other words, Dassey won. His conviction was vacated, for more accurately, his petition for right of habeas corpus was granted, and the state was given 90 days to do one of the following things. 1. Release Dassey from custody. 2. Retrial him, but without using the so-called confession. Or 3. Appeal the district court's decision to the 7th Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. And I think we all know what they did, because if we remember correctly, it was in the 2nd season of Making a Murderer. So if you guys watched it, or even if you've been here since the beginning in 2016, 2015, 2016, then you know what happened. I've been here since 2000, when I first watched it, December 2015. So I kind of, unfortunately, experienced it all happening as it was happening. Not on the same level as Brendan, obviously, but as a friend of Brendan. Regarding option number 1, and as I tried to explain to several fans of Making a Murderer who thought Dassey was actually going to walk free, that was me. I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, you're coming home. Yeah, that didn't happen. Releasing him from custody was off the table from the get-go. But we learned that the hard way, didn't we? The prosecutors were too emotionally invested in this case. They had convinced themselves that Dassey was really guilty, and further, the police did not violate any of his constitutional rights. There wasn't a federal court judge on earth that was going to change their minds about any of that. And even if the prosecutors believed that Dassey's rights were violated, they still needed to protect their victory, or, at the very least, defend the honor of the trial judge and the state appellate court that had hand-delivered their victory to them, and would continue to hand-deliver more victories to them in the future. Regarding option number 2, retrying the case without the confession, there's no eyewitness or physical evidence linking Dassey to the crime. Ken Kratz pointed out that, in addition to Dassey's now suppressed statement, he also made earlier statements that could be used at the second trial. Could. The problem with Kratz's argument, however, is that Dassey did not incriminate himself in any of those earlier statements. If he had, the prosecutor would have piled them up and used them at his first trial. Ooh. Therefore, even though the prosecutors firmly believed in Dassey's guilt, they did not want to retry a case without an eyewitness, physical evidence, or a confession. Option number 2, therefore, was about as likely as option number 1. That leaves the only choice, option number 3. The state would appeal to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. As the next chapter explains, the Seventh Circuit's decision would hinge on a rather strange bit of law called the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, also known as AEDPA, A-E-D-P-A, I forget how that AEDPA, which sucks. They never should have brought that in. And I think, hey Mose, I think even, because so this was voted in by, under, what's his name? Clinton? Bill Clinton? William? It was basically brought in under him, right? If you watch Making a Murderer, they have an episode where they discussed it, and they actually broke it down really well. But before we get into this next chapter, I'll just say, Bill Clinton later made a statement saying he wished he never voted that in because it was so broad that it affected all cases. And unfortunately, because of this, what we're going to discuss next, makes it impossible for Brendan to use the coerced confession angle now. He can't use it anymore because his confession was deemed admissible. Like, I'm giving you a spoiler alert. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court didn't take his case. And because of that, the state won, and it was considered admissible in court. So his false confession still stands, and because it went from point A to all the way up to the Supreme Court, that means they can't take it back and say, they can't basically go back from square one with the false confession. They can't, because of this next thing that we're going to talk about. So unfortunately, that's why when people ask me, like, well, what are Brendan's options? See, he has other options. It's just not the false confession route. They can't argue that anymore. There's tons of evidence, though, like, and I know there's no evidence showing that Brendan did anything, but they have all this evidence on Stephen's trial that they could use and turn around and say, well, none of it connects to Brendan, or even some of it doesn't even connect to the confession. So they can use stuff, you know. We just don't know what they're going to do yet. All right. Chapter 27, page 145. The AEDPA, the formidable barrier. If the issue in Dassey's case was whether his confession is true, then Dassey would win hands down. Not only did the federal judge have significant doubts as to the reliability of the confession, but a few people outside of a handful of current former government agents in Wisconsin think the confession is true. And even those that are forced to concede with the confession itself is false, they merely contend that Dassey was somehow involved in Holbach's death, thus making the conclusion, but not the details, of his confession sort of true. But unfortunately for Dassey, truth isn't the issue. Instead, the issue is whether his confession was voluntary. If it was not voluntary, in other words, it was involuntary or coerced, and then it should not have been used against him, and he is entitled to a new trial. However, as far as the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals is concerned, that really isn't the issue either. If the Seventh Circuit only had to decide whether the confession was voluntary, Dassey would once again win hands down. But the issue is more muddled, or, to put it more kindly, unnecessary nuance. Dassey's appeal is subject to the standards set forth in the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, AEDPA. For Dassey's case, this applicable law is poorly named. Nothing about his case revolves terrorism, and Wisconsin doesn't use the death penalty. Regardless, with the passage of the AEDPA in 1996, Congress dramatically changed the federal court's role in reviewing judgments of the state criminal courts. AEDPA now affects a formidable barrier for any defendant seeking justice in the federal court after getting unfairly stapled to the wall by a conviction-loving state court system. More specifically, a federal court cannot grant a petitioner, I don't know why I was looking at that word being like, what is that? Petitioner, habeas relief merely because the federal court disagrees, or even strongly disagrees, with the state's court's decision. Instead, for the Seventh Circuit to side with Dassey, it must agree with Judge Duffin and the Wisconsin Courts of Appeals opinion, not merely wrong, but so wrong that no reasonable judge would have reached that decision. Despite this high standard, which renders defense victories rare, even extraordinarily, Dassey appears to be on the least somewhat solid ground. Yet, even putting aside the magnitude of what is at stake here, who would want a matter of any sufficiency to hinge on such bizarre, arbitrary standard? Where is the line between the state court being merely wrong versus so wrong? This is even a real distinction. Or is it just more of a wordplay that can be arbitrarily used to deny a defendant's justice? Shouldn't the federal court just get the case right on its own merits? Shouldn't it just decide whether the state court was wrong? Period. With regard to the AEDPA, I previously wrote, this bizarre scenario seems more like the product of a Twilight Zone episode than a modern system of criminal justice. The logistics of the whole thing, whether the state appellate court was merely wrong or so wrong, reminds me of a comic strip with a trial judge, a cat, and the defendant, a dog, whether he pleads guilty, or really, really guilty. The difference between Dassey's case and the comic strip, of course, is that the seemingly meaningless distinction in Dassey's case, it actually makes it the difference in the world. But ironically, the Wisconsin Court of Appeals left to affirm the conviction, combined with its lack of reasoning ability, may be what saves the day for Dassey in federal court. Remember Chapter 25 and the criticism of the state appellate court's two-paragraph, quote-unquote, analysis. In the chapter, I argued that it really wasn't an analysis at all. The state court, without even looking at any of Wiegert and Fassbender's actual statements to determine whether they constitute substantive promises, merely jumped to its predetermined analysis-free conclusion. There were no promises of leniency. That was potentially a big mistake. The state appellate court should have known that skipping the analysis and going straight to the conclusion wouldn't have earned its passing grade on a law school exam, and its laziness failed the federal court's test too. Although the AEDPA is designed to give tremendous deference to the state appellate court's analysis, there first has to be some kind of actual analysis to which the federal court can defer. If there is none, then the federal court decides the issue from scratch in heightened AEDPA, sort of, as the practical matter falls by the wayside. To summarize, and perhaps more clearly reinstate this complex maze of legal gibberish, Judge Duffin first held that Dassey passed the stringent AEDPA test. However, the test is so stringent that the Seventh Circuit could conceivably reach a different decision. But Duffin also held that due to the state appellate court's complete lack of analysis, Dassey's claims should really be analyzed under the lower pre-AEDPA standard, that is de novo, because there's no state court analysis to apply AEDPA standards to. And without anything to reach, the federal court can defer. It may, and in fact must, do its analysis from scratch. In a way, this part of the decision seems to discard the irrational merely wrong versus so wrong test, and instead apply a more reasonable test that asks a simpler question: was the state appellate court wrong? The stage has now been set. Will the Seventh Circuit rule for Dassey, or will it rule for the state? As the next two chapters explain, the answer is yes. Okay, when does it? I think it stops when because I know that this book was a little bit behind in his processing, and I think the last chapter is when calling the Supreme Court. So it is going to go over the appellate court, or the 7th District Court, which was a very interesting and frustrating process to watch happen in real time. And I still don't. It still is crazy to me, but yeah. See, it's 11:10. I hear my dad's in the living room, so if the guy comes, then at least he'll answer the door for him. But yeah, I keep stressing this, like we already know what happens. Unfortunately, but I think that it's interesting to have such a deep analysis of the law and what actually it means and all that. And I appreciate this book a lot, and I hope you all appreciate it too. I think I'm gonna read a little bit longer, and then I'll call it a day. And then hopefully by this time next week I'll have better internet, and then I could have it on my computer, the StreamYard, and then be able to do it from there. Especially for Saturday, when I do the court, finish up the whatchamacallit, the post-conviction trial. Okay. Chapter 28, page 149. Too close for comfort. After what seemed like forever for the court that is known as the Rocket Docket, the 7th District Court of Appeals finally issued its decision on June 22nd, 2017. It is too close for comfort, 2-1 opinion of a 3-judge panel. The 7th Circuit affirmed that the District Court's decision, Dassey's so-called confession, was coerced. That was such a great day. It should not have been used against him at trial, and Judge Duffin's reversal of the conviction, or more technically, his granted of the right, stands. The 7th Circuit decision is 128 pages. Part of the reason it is so long is that there was no state appellate court reasoning to which the court could defer. So it had to analysis everything from scratch, which could have been a good thing if you think about it. Oh, hold on a second. Okay, so that was the, I'm so sorry for that. That was the internet people. They're coming over right now, so I'm just going to cut this short. And I apologize again for that, but thank you all so much for being here, for listening. If you're catching the replay, thank you. And I hope everyone has a great day, and I will be back hopefully tomorrow. Wait, what's today? Today's Monday. So Wednesday, I'm going to try to do a Wednesday morning catch up and to talk about postcards and stuff like that, because we should be done with the voting process, and yeah, and maybe we might even have the results from the sweater contest. But anyway, so yeah, I'll see you all when I see you all. And I hope everyone has a safe day, and thank you so much. And let me end this on something sad and depressing, like I always do. Let's do this one.